Hello, I'm here to help.
Welcome. Please come inside.
Thank you.
This way.
The billionaire had everything most people dream about. He had money, power, respect, and a name known across the country. His company owned tall buildings, busy factories, and expensive properties in big cities. Yet one morning, he found himself driving alone toward a small town he had not seen in more than 30 years. The road was narrow, quiet, and full of memories he had tried to forget. Every mile closer made his chest feel heavier, even though he told himself this trip was only business. This small town was where his life had begun. It was where he grew up poor, surrounded by dusty streets and simple houses. Back then, people knew him as a skinny boy with torn shoes and big dreams. He worked hard, studied harder, and promised himself he would escape this place one day. And he did. He left the town as a young man and never looked back. Success came slowly at first, then all at once. Over time, he trained himself not to think about his past, because remembering it felt like weakness. At the edge of the town stood the old house. It was small, silent, and forgotten, just like the life he once lived. The paint had peeled away long ago. The windows were cracked, and weeds had grown wild around the walls. Since his parents passed away, no one had lived there. Neighbors avoided the place, saying it felt empty and sad. For the billionaire, this house was nothing more than an old burden that refused to disappear. He had returned with a clear plan. The land was valuable now. A new commercial project would bring profit and development to the area. Demolishing the house made perfect sense. From a business point of view, it was the smartest decision. He had already signed papers and spoken to contractors. All that remained was a final visit. One last look before the house was gone forever. As he parked his car and stepped out, the air felt different. The town was quieter than he remembered. Children no longer played loudly in the streets. Many shops were closed. Time had moved on, just like he had. He walked slowly toward the house, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path he once ran barefoot as a child. Standing in front of the door, he paused. For a moment, he remembered his mother opening this same door with tired eyes and a gentle smile. He remembered his father sitting on the steps after long days of hard work. These thoughts annoyed him. He had not come here to remember. He had come to finish something. Inside, the house smelled of dust and age. Sunlight slipped through broken windows, lighting up empty rooms. Every corner whispered stories from the past. The kitchen where his mother cooked simple meals. The small room where he studied at night, dreaming of a better future. The walls were cracked, but they still held echoes of laughter, arguments, and hope. To him, this house was a symbol of everything he hated about his early life. It reminded him of hunger, embarrassment, and feeling less than others. He believed destroying it would finally free him from those feelings. He told himself that success meant leaving weakness behind, and this house was the biggest sign of weakness he knew. Yet as he walked through the rooms, something strange happened. The anger he expected to feel did not fully come. Instead, there was a quiet sadness, mixed with something else he could not name. This house had seen his worst days, but it had also protected him. It had been the place where his dreams were born, even when the world outside felt cruel. He shook his head, pushing those thoughts away. Memories were dangerous. They could make a man forget who he had become. He reminded himself that he was no longer that poor boy. He was a billionaire now, and billionaires did not live in the past. Still, before leaving, he took one slow look around. The silence felt heavy, almost like the house was waiting for something. He did not know it yet, but this visit was not just about demolition. It was the beginning of a journey that would force him to face truths he had avoided for decades. And this forgotten house was about to change everything he believed about success, strength, and himself. He did not plan to stay long, but the house had a strange way of slowing him down. After walking through the first few rooms, he found himself sitting on an old wooden chair near the window. It creaked under his weight, and for a moment, he almost laughed. This chair had once belonged to his father. As a child, he was warned never to sit on it because one leg was weak. Now here he was, a billionaire, sitting carefully on a broken chair in a broken house. He looked out the window and saw the same dusty road he used to walk every day to school. Back then, he carried books borrowed from friends because his parents could not afford new ones. He remembered how embarrassed he felt when other children laughed at his worn clothes. Those memories rushed back without warning, sharp and uncomfortable. He had spent his whole life trying to bury them. He stood up and moved into the next room. This had been his bedroom. The walls were stained, and the ceiling had cracks like thin scars. He remembered lying on the floor at night, staring up, promising himself that one day he would never sleep under a weak roof again. That promise had driven him harder than anything else. It pushed him through failures, long nights, and lonely success. But as he stood there now, something felt different. The room did not feel small anymore. It felt honest. This was where his ambition was born, not in a fancy office or a luxury hotel, but right here, surrounded by limits. He noticed a small mark on the wall near the door. His height had been measured there as a child. His mother used to smile every time she drew a new line, proud that her son was growing, even when life felt stuck. He reached out and touched the mark without thinking. His hand froze. For years, he had convinced himself that his parents held him back. Now he wondered if that was ever true. A sudden sound broke the silence. Something fell in the kitchen. His heart beat faster, even though he knew no one else was there. He walked carefully toward the noise. A cupboard door had finally given up and collapsed onto the floor. Dust filled the air, making him cough. As he cleared the dust, he noticed old utensils scattered on the ground. Cheap, worn, but clean. His mother had always kept things clean, no matter how little they had. He remembered her saying that dignity did not cost money. At the time, he thought it was just a way to feel better about being poor. Now, standing alone in the kitchen, those words carried weight. He leaned against the counter and felt tired, not in his body, but in his mind. For the first time in years, there was no meeting to rush to, no deal to close, no numbers to check. Just silence and memories he could no longer control. Outside, the sun was slowly lowering. He realized he had been inside much longer than planned. The demolition crew was scheduled to arrive in a few days. Everything was already decided, or so he thought. As he prepared to leave, he noticed something odd near the staircase. A small section of the floor looked newer than the rest, as if it had been repaired long ago. It caught his attention because his father was known for fixing things himself, even when they had no money. He bent down and pressed on the wood. It did not move, but something about it felt deliberate. He told himself it did not matter. Old houses had many strange details. Still, his curiosity stayed with him. As he stepped outside and locked the door, he felt uneasy. This visit was supposed to give him closure, but instead it had opened something inside him. The house no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a question he had avoided answering his whole life. Driving away, he looked back once more. The house stood quietly, unchanged, waiting. He did not know it yet, but the real reason he had returned was not business at all. Something hidden inside that house was pulling him back, and soon, he would have no choice but to return and face it. He tried to forget the house, but the house refused to leave him. All night, memories followed him like shadows. In his hotel room, surrounded by luxury and silence, he could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cracked walls, the height marks on the bedroom wall, and the strange wooden patch near the staircase. By morning, he knew he had to go back. Not for business, not for demolition, but for answers. The next day, he returned alone. The town was waking up slowly. Shop owners lifted metal shutters, and old men sat outside, talking about weather and politics. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another stranger passing through. That suited him. He did not want attention. This was personal. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt different, as if it remembered him. Dust floated in the morning light, and the air was heavy but calm. He went straight to the staircase. Kneeling down, he examined the wooden patch more closely. The edges were smoother than the surrounding floor. This was not random. Someone had placed it there on purpose. Using his fingers, he pried at the wood. It resisted at first, then slowly lifted with a dull sound. Beneath it was a small hidden space. His heart began to race. Inside, there was an old wooden trunk, dark with age but well protected. It looked untouched, like it had been waiting. He sat down on the floor and stared at the trunk. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were neatly stacked papers tied with string, a few photographs, and a sealed envelope. The envelope had his name written on it in his father's handwriting. His throat tightened. This was not something he was supposed to find during a demolition visit. He picked up the letter and sat silently for a long time before opening it. The paper was yellow, and the ink had faded, but the words were clear. His father had written it years ago, never knowing if his son would return to read it. The letter spoke of love, pride, and regret. His father apologized for not being able to give him a better life. He wrote about how hard it was to watch his son grow with big dreams in a small house. Then came the truth that changed everything. His father explained that years ago, a wealthy developer had offered a large amount of money for the land. It was more money than the family had ever seen. Accepting it would have lifted them out of poverty instantly. But the offer came with conditions that were dishonest and harmful to the town. His father refused. He wrote that choosing honesty meant choosing struggle. It meant long days, unpaid bills, and silent suffering. But he believed some things were more important than money. He wanted his son to grow up knowing that his name was clean, even if his pockets were empty. Tears filled the billionaire's eyes. All his life, he believed his parents lacked ambition. He thought their choices kept him poor. Now he saw the truth. Their choices protected him, shaped his values, and quietly guided him toward success, even when he did not realize it. He looked at the photographs next. There were pictures of town events, old community gatherings, and his parents helping neighbors. In one photo, his father stood beside the same developer mentioned in the letter, shaking his head firmly. The moment of refusal had been captured without him ever knowing. Under the papers, he found official documents showing the land's historical value. The house stood on ground connected to the town's early settlers. His parents had been protecting it, hoping one day it would be recognized and preserved. The weight of what he planned to destroy finally hit him. This was not just an old house. It was a story of sacrifice, integrity, and quiet courage. He closed the trunk slowly. The demolition plan now felt wrong, almost shameful. For the first time in decades, he felt truly small, not because of poverty, but because of understanding. As he left the house that day, his steps were slower. He knew this discovery was only the beginning. What he found under the staircase had cracked something open inside him, and there was no going back to the man he was before. He did not leave the town right away. After finding the letter and the documents, he sat in his car for a long time, staring at the quiet street ahead. The engine was off, but his mind was loud. For years, he had measured life in profits, losses, and growth. Now, those numbers felt empty. The words written by his father stayed with him, repeating again and again, forcing him to see his past in a new light. Later that afternoon, he decided to walk through the town, not as a businessman, but as someone who once belonged here. The streets were familiar yet distant, like an old photograph. Some buildings were gone, replaced by newer ones, but others remained unchanged. He passed the small school he once attended. The gate was rusted, and the walls were faded, but the sound of children laughing carried into the air. It made him stop. He remembered standing in that same yard, feeling invisible and small. Teachers often praised him for his focus, but no one knew how hungry he sometimes was. Back then, he believed that money would solve everything. It would erase shame, silence doubt, and protect him from pain. Now, after reading his father's letter, he realized how simple that belief had been. As he continued walking, an elderly man sitting outside a tea shop looked up at him closely. The man's eyes widened with recognition. Slowly, he stood up and said his name, unsure at first, then confident. It was his father's old friend, a neighbor who used to visit their house often. Hearing his name spoken in that place again felt strange, almost unreal. They sat together, and the old man spoke about his parents. He talked about how his father refused shortcuts and dishonest deals, even when times were hardest. He spoke about his mother's kindness, how she shared food with neighbors who had even less. These were stories the billionaire had never heard. His parents had never spoken of their struggles out loud. They had protected him in silence. The old man then mentioned the land. He confirmed everything written in the letter. The town council once tried to pressure his father into selling the property cheaply to outsiders. When his father refused, life became harder. Work opportunities disappeared. People turned their backs. Yet his father never complained. Hearing this made the billionaire feel a deep ache. All those years, he blamed his parents for his difficult childhood. He never understood that they were fighting battles he could not see, battles that shaped the man he eventually became. That evening, he returned to the house once more. This time, he did not feel anger or shame. He walked slowly through each room, touching the walls with care. He imagined his parents moving through the space, doing their best with what little they had. The house no longer felt weak. It felt strong. He sat on the floor of his old bedroom and allowed himself to feel regret. Regret for leaving without looking back. Regret for not returning sooner. Regret for measuring his parents' lives by money instead of values. Outside, the sky darkened. The house stood quietly, listening. He thought about the demolition plans waiting on his desk in the city. Tearing this place down now felt like erasing a truth that deserved to be remembered. By the time night fell, his decision was changing. The house did not need to disappear. It needed to be understood. As he locked the door and stepped outside, he knew something important had shifted. This place was no longer just a reminder of where he came from. It was a reminder of who he was meant to be. And with that realization, he understood that his next choice would not be made as a billionaire, but as a son honoring a legacy he had almost destroyed. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in many years, there was no urgent call, no assistant knocking, no schedule filled with meetings. The silence felt strange but comforting. As sunlight entered the room, his mind returned to the house and everything it now represented. Demolishing it was no longer a simple business decision. It felt like a personal betrayal. He returned to the property with a different purpose. This time, he carried the documents he had found in the hidden trunk. He wanted to understand them fully. Sitting on the front steps, he carefully read each paper again. They spoke of the land's historical importance, early families who had lived there, and plans his parents had once discussed with local leaders. His parents had dreamed of preserving the land, not owning it, but protecting it for future generations. As he read, he noticed how carefully the papers were arranged. His father had not acted out of fear or stubbornness. Every choice had been thoughtful and deliberate. The more he learned, the clearer it became that his parents' lives had been guided by values, not circumstances. They had little, yet they thought far ahead. He decided to visit the town records office. Inside, the shelves were filled with old files and fading books. The clerk, surprised to see someone interested in such old matters, helped him search. What he found confirmed everything. The land had been discussed for preservation years ago, but the effort had died quietly after his parents passed away. No one had fought for it since. Walking out of the office, he felt a sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just an owner of land. He was the last connection to a story unfinished. The demolition plans in his briefcase felt heavier with every step. Later that day, he met with the contractors. They spoke eagerly about timelines, costs, and efficiency. He listened quietly, then surprised them by asking to delay the project. The confusion on their faces reflected his own inner conflict. This decision would cost money, time, and possibly reputation. But something inside him was stronger than those concerns. That evening, he returned to the house once again. He walked through it slowly, imagining what it could become instead of what it once was. He pictured people walking through the rooms, learning about the town's history, about honesty, about choices made without reward. The idea felt right. As darkness fell, he sat alone in the living room. The walls seemed less empty now. He realized that this house had been teaching him something all along. It was teaching him that success without purpose feels hollow, and wealth without memory feels cold. For years, he had believed that moving forward meant cutting ties with the past. Now he understood that moving forward sometimes meant going back and making things right. Before leaving, he made a decision that would change the direction of everything. He would not destroy the house. He would restore it. Not as a private property, not as a symbol of his wealth, but as a place of meaning. As he locked the door, he felt lighter. The fear that once drove him had softened into clarity. The boy who grew up dreaming of escape and the man who became a billionaire were finally meeting in the same place. And for the first time, they were in agreement. The decision to restore the house was only the beginning. Making it real would not be easy. The next few days were filled with conversations he never expected to have. He met with town officials, local historians, and elderly residents who still remembered his parents. At first, many were skeptical. They had seen promises made before and quietly forgotten. A billionaire showing interest in an old, broken house sounded too good to be true. He listened more than he spoke. This was new for him. In boardrooms, he usually controlled the conversation. Here, he allowed others to tell their stories. People spoke about the past, about the town before factories closed, about neighbors helping each other survive hard times. Again and again, his parents' names came up, not as victims, but as pillars of quiet strength. One afternoon, An old woman arrived with a small cloth bag. She said his mother had once helped her during a difficult winter. Inside the bag were handwritten recipes and notes his mother used to share with neighbors. The simple kindness of it hit him harder than any business loss he had ever faced. His mother had left behind a legacy no balance sheet could record. As plans began to form, challenges appeared quickly. The house was fragile. Years of neglect had weakened the structure. Restoring it would cost more than demolishing it. His advisors warned him gently. From a financial perspective, this made no sense. He thanked them and ignored the advice. This was no longer about profit. He hired local workers instead of outside companies. Some were people he once went to school with. They were older now, carrying their own stories of struggle and survival. Working together in the house created an unexpected energy. Laughter returned to the rooms, replacing the long silence. As walls were repaired and floors strengthened, memories seemed to rise from every corner. Under layers of old paint, they found his childhood drawings. Behind a broken shelf, they discovered his father's tools, carefully stored. Each discovery felt like a message from the past, reminding him that this place had always been alive. During breaks, the workers shared stories. They talked about how his father refused to cheat customers, even when others did. How his mother fed hungry children without asking questions. Listening to them, he finally understood the full cost of the values his parents had chosen. They paid with comfort, but they earned respect that lasted long after they were gone. At night, he stayed in town instead of returning to the city. Without realizing it, he was reconnecting not only with the house, but with himself. He slept better. The noise in his mind softened. Success had kept him busy, but it had also kept him distant. News of the restoration spread. Journalists called. Investors questioned him. He refused interviews and avoided headlines. This project was not meant to polish his image. It was meant to heal something broken inside him. One evening, as he stood watching the sun set behind the house, he felt pride unlike anything he had felt before. Not pride in wealth or achievement, but pride in continuity. He was not building something new. He was protecting something true. The house was slowly transforming, but so was he. With every repaired wall and every shared memory, he was learning that real success is not measured by how far you run from your past, but by how honestly you face it. And in doing so, he was finally becoming the man his parents had quietly hoped he would be. He never imagined that a house could hold so many lessons, but by the 7th day of restoration, he realized it was teaching him more than any boardroom ever had. Each morning, he arrived before the workers, walking through the halls that were slowly regaining life. Dust no longer dominated the corners. Sunlight poured in through repaired windows, making the old walls glow with warmth. The house was transforming, but even more importantly, he was transforming with it. He began thinking beyond bricks and wood. This place had been a silent witness to a life of struggle and sacrifice, and now it could become something more. It could tell stories, teach lessons, and inspire people the way his parents had inspired the town quietly for decades. The idea of turning the house into a community center and local museum formed in his mind. Children could learn about history, families could gather, and neighbors could share stories that might otherwise be lost. The thought made him smile. For the first time, his wealth felt purposeful. The townspeople began noticing his efforts. Some came to offer help, others simply watched with curiosity. Slowly, old friendships were rekindled. An elderly neighbor shared photographs of town events from decades ago. Another offered furniture left behind by families who had moved. Each contribution added life and authenticity to the restoration, and the billionaire began to see how intertwined his family had always been with the community. At night, he would sit in his old bedroom, imagining the boy he once was. The room was no longer small or limiting. It was a place of beginnings. He reflected on his childhood dreams, the hunger he had felt, and the embarrassment he had carried. But instead of regret, he now felt gratitude. The struggles had shaped him, his parents' choices had protected him, and the town had nurtured him without him even realizing it. During these reflective moments, he noticed something he had missed before, a small, hand-painted sign above the doorway to the kitchen. It read, "Home is where the heart endures." His mother had painted it years ago. At the time, he had been too young to understand. Now, decades later, the message resonated more than any of his achievements ever had. It was a reminder that wealth and power were meaningless without care, compassion, and connection. As the restoration neared completion, he organized a small gathering to involve the town. People came to help place photographs, rearrange old furniture, and plant flowers in the neglected garden. The billionaire worked alongside them, hands dirty, sleeves rolled up. For the first time in years, he felt equal to everyone around him. Money no longer mattered. Status no longer mattered. Only respect, effort, and shared history mattered. By the final evening, the house was no longer a ruin. Walls stood strong, floors gleamed, and every room held stories waiting to be told. Standing on the porch, he looked out at the town below. The quiet streets now seemed alive with history and memory. He realized that this house, which he had once seen as a symbol of poverty and limitation, had become a symbol of legacy and purpose. And in that quiet moment, he understood something profound. Success is not just what you achieve for yourself, but what you preserve, honor, and share with the world around you. The billionaire, who had once rushed through life chasing wealth and status, now understood that true power lies in connection, integrity, and remembering where you came from. The house, the town, and the memories of his parents had all combined to change him. For the first time, he felt complete, not because of what he had earned, but because of what he had learned, embraced, and chosen to protect. The journey that began with demolition had transformed into a story of redemption, purpose, and heart, one that he knew would touch everyone who walked through those restored doors. He stood quietly on the porch as the first visitors arrived for the opening of the restored house. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. For decades, this house had been empty, silent, and forgotten. Now, it was filled with life again, not just the laughter of neighbors and friends, but the memories and stories of generations that had once called this place home. The billionaire felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a mix of pride, humility, and deep peace. He had chosen not to give a speech that morning. Words, he realized, could not capture the magnitude of what this house represented. It was not his success, not his money, that mattered here. It was the love, sacrifice, and integrity of the people who had lived here long before him. Every room, every object, and every photograph held a story that demanded respect. And now, he had made it his mission to honor those stories. The townspeople moved through the house, marveling at the restoration. Children peeked into cupboards and ran their fingers over the old walls, discovering the carvings and height marks of generations past. An elderly woman paused in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she remembered how his mother had once helped feed her family when they had nothing. His father's tools were displayed neatly in the corner, not as relics, but as symbols of honesty and hard work. The billionaire watched quietly from the side, feeling the weight of decades lift from his shoulders. He remembered the day he had planned to destroy this house, how blind he had been to its true value. Now, standing here, seeing the impact of his decision to restore it, he realized that wealth and power were meaningless without understanding and connection. This house had taught him lessons that no amount of money or influence ever could. Later, as the crowd gathered in the main room, an elderly neighbor came forward. She held a small box tied with a ribbon. Inside were letters, photographs, and keepsakes she had preserved over the years. She handed it to him silently, her eyes glistening. He understood immediately. This was not just a gift, but a trust. His parents' legacy, the story of their lives, was now in his hands. It was his responsibility to carry it forward. He walked through the rooms alone for a moment, touching the walls and remembering the past. Every memory, every struggle, every moment of joy and sorrow had led to this point. The house had witnessed it all, and now it stood as a bridge between generations. It was a place where children could learn, neighbors could connect, and the story of his parents' integrity could live on forever. By the time the ceremony ended, the sun was high in the sky. The house, once deserted and forgotten, now radiated warmth and life. People left smiling, exchanging stories, and promising to return. The billionaire lingered for a moment, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He knew that he had not only restored a house, but had also restored a part of himself that had been lost to time, ambition, and pride. As he finally walked away from the porch, he turned back one last time. The house stood strong, proud, and alive. It was no longer just a building at the edge of town. It was a living testament to love, sacrifice, and the power of remembering where you come from. And in that moment, he realized that true wealth was not measured by the money in his bank account, but by the legacy he preserved, the lessons he honored, and the lives he touched along the way. For the first time in decades, the billionaire felt whole. The journey that began with a plan to demolish had transformed him completely. He had returned as a son, and he left as a guardian of history, integrity, and hope, knowing that what he had saved would inspire generations yet to come.